Hi everyone, this is Jim. Welcome to this Blitz chess postmortem of my Blitz game number 309. I was white here and played e4, and my opponent played e6, the French defense. So I continue with the main move, d4, d5, and knight c3 is the top choice here. Of course, there are other ways to play, like knight d2, the Tarrasch, e5, the advance, or taking the exchange, and other moves too. But this is one of the main moves, and then bishop b4 is the Winawer variation. And now the normal reply here is e5. You see that's by far and away the largest. I've been trying a different line, which appears to be a gambit. You play a3, force this exchange, and then if black takes the pawn, you have queen g4. And that's what I meant to play, but instead I played bishop d2. And this line is known as the fingerslip variation of the French defense because of Alejan. He was writing the tournament notes for a game where he had played this, and he said it was just a slip of his fingers. He meant to play e5 first there before playing bishop d2. So anyway, it's been called the fingerslip variation ever since then. He won that game, I think. So it turns out to be a gambit that you can play. So it should go d takes e4, the engine is recommending. But if he takes first and tries to win a pawn, then you have this queen g4 idea. So that's not so great. That would have sort of transposed into what I wanted to play anyway. But after bishop d2, he can take first. And let's see, do I take back? If knight takes e4 to get the pawn back, is there something bad happening here? Queen takes d4. Ah, okay. So you lose a pawn that way. So the best move here is knight g to e2 if you're going to play this. Interesting. And the game goes on. But it's not a great gambit. It looks like gives the edge to black somewhat. Let's see, what's the book move here? Cancel that. c5. So d takes e4. Instead of knight takes e4, the immediate queen g4 is the book move. Interesting. Yeah, the engine doesn't really approve of that. Okay. But anyway, my opponent didn't play that. What we got was after bishop b4, bishop d2, he just played c5 immediately. So sort of ignoring what I was doing and playing the standard pattern. But then this allows me to escape without too much damage. I play a3. And he goes into this funny line where you take the pawn instead of taking the knight. Taking the knight is more typical and probably better. This way I can grab his bishop. And this is not, I mean, it's kind of a funny looking pawn formation over on the queen side, but it's not particularly weak. And I have a good position here. And I was thinking in the game he could just get the pawn still, but he's got to deal with this threat on g7. So that's why he played f6. And so we're out of the book here. And I got a nice position out of the opening. Let's see, instead of f6, he could have tried knight f6. Yeah, that's a more logical way to play. Block the attack of the bishop on the g-pawn and at the same time develop a piece. Get rid of a couple of these arrows. So the knight f6 is the best way to play there. He played f6. And so I have a substantial edge here, and it continues. I go ahead and exchange to give him an isolated pawn there. And then just develop my pieces. So this part of the game is pretty normal. People just getting their pieces out. Maybe the queen here is not the best move, but still keeps an edge for white. It's always a tricky decision to decide when to develop the queen, but it seems like, you know, his pieces are not yet developed. And I can put some pressure on the bishop. But, so the engine thinks he should just take the knight here and get out of trouble that way. He retreated the bishop. And then I played here. So I miscalculated this. This was an interesting tactical moment, though. So I was figuring he would play knight to c6 to fork my king and queen, but then I would take his rook. And that's what happened. But I missed a certain point about this this line. So if you want to think about it, see if you can figure out why this isn't so great for white. The engine rates it as about even, but there is a tactic, or there is an intermediate move in the middle of this combination that I missed here. So if you want to take a second, pause the video and think about it. Okay, I'm going to give the answer away. So he plays knight bc6, and I took and he takes the queen. Oh, he didn't take the queen right away. He should take the queen. And then I take his queen, and then he can take my bishop with check. That's the intermediate move. So he gets his bishop, he gets his knight out of trouble, and then he takes the rook. And he's a whole piece up because he's grabbed this bishop here. He's threatening my bishop. So, yeah, he's got a rook in 3 pieces, and I have a rook in 2 pieces. So that would just win a piece. So he didn't play that in the best way. After rook takes e8, if he played knight takes d4, I'm better off taking the knight and playing this position where I have basically a rook and a bishop against a queen and an extra pawn, but the edge would be towards black in that position. So instead of that, he played queen takes a8, and then I'm out of trouble. But the other thing, and there was another thing I missed too, which is he doesn't have to use that knight to fork. He could use this knight to fork, and now when I take his rook, which I have to do to get out of trouble, he takes my queen, and I'm not threatening his queen, so I have no choice but to take the knight. Says bishop takes d4 is best, and once again we've got a situation where I've got a rook and a bishop against a queen. So the engine still likes white a little bit here, but that would be a tricky position to play. Tough to go with the queen. So I made a mistake here when I played rook takes a7, and then when I was calculating the response. There's a rule I have when I try to figure out tactics. I call it the rule of 2. And it's because in many tactics there are sometimes 2 ways to achieve the same goal. For example, a knight can attack a square in 2 different ways, or in this case we have 2 different knights attacking the same square. It also happens with bishops. There's often 2 different bishop moves that can attack the same square. So the rule of 2 is just a way to remind myself to look at the other way, not just the way you expect. Because to get good at calculating these things, you really have to be able to consider all of your opponent's replies, and also to notice these intermediate moves like bishop takes, knight takes bishop check in the middle of that other sequence. So anyway, he went here, and I took, and he took back with the queen. And so now I have a decent advantage here. So I'm just bringing my queen over to the king side, trying to continue the attack over there. And I've got a loose pawn here. The engine says I should ignore it and play b5. Let's take a look at this. The engine suggests the move b5 quite a few times in the subsequent sequence. So let's take a look at b5 and see what the value is here. So the knight is chased away. Well, he says knight f5 or knight d8. Knight f5 attacking my queen. Let's take a look at this line. Queen goes over to f4. Rook e8 attacking my bishop. Bishop goes to d3. Queen b8. There's a lot of dancing, leaving that knight hanging there, not there. Queen b8, sorry. Hitting my queen. And if I take the queen, then he gets his knight out of hock that way. So queen g4. And now knight c to e7 finally. Finally moving the knight. It's not clear why that was so great for me. I didn't gain any material. Maybe it's just better than the alternative that I played. I played bishop to d3, just defending this pawn here. And now he could take and give me an isolated pawn, so it's not as good a defense as that somewhat long computer line. Okay, so I played, he played knight f5 here, attacking my queen, instead of grabbing my bishop. And I drop my queen back to h3, and then he goes queen c8, defending because his bishop was under attack. I mean, his knight was under attack by my bishop and queen. So it's all defended, and so I'm just developing my pieces. And he pushes on with d4, kicking my bishop back to d2. All this leaves me still with some edge here. Rook d8, defending his pawn. And now bishop takes, bishop to c4 check could have been played here. Also b5. Once again, this b5 idea is recommended by the chess engine. It's interesting. It just doesn't like the knight there. Maybe, I guess, when I chase the knight away, I can try and get some pressure on the d pawn, but it looks very solidly defended. This d pawn has got 3 pieces behind it. It doesn't look like I'm winning it anytime soon. Anyway, I go knight h4 to try and undermine one of his pieces here, and now that was not a good move. The engine just thinks this exchange helps black here, and we get into basically an even game. So that's funny. So instead of knight h4, I guess almost anything is better. b5, bishop c4 check, bishop f1. These are kind of strange moves. Maybe there's not a great active plan here, aside from b5, just kicking that knight. Okay, so I played a move that leads to only a slight edge for white, basically equality here. He develops his knight with an attack on my pawn here, and brings his queen in. So his pieces have gotten active, but I counterattack over here on the king side. I'd been planning that move, and now he plays the knight here. And so this is another interesting tactical moment. When he takes my bishop, his knight will be pinned, so I'm taking advantage of that by playing the move h4, which the engine actually approved of for once. Yeah, it likes the move h4. If I just retreat the bishop, there's not a lot going on, and his queen can start gobbling up pawns over here. So yeah, advancing the advancing the pawn and taking advantage of this tactic seems to be the best way to keep things going. I mean, it doesn't actually win material, but it does mess up the structure in front of his king a bit. So now I was expecting king g7. Yeah, he played that. Okay. And I took the knight. I was wondering if I could get away with the rook here, but his knight was guarding that square. So he has to take back with the pawn, but now I can bring my rook in, and that's why this turned out to be a good sequence, because at the end I get to mess up his pawns. So he can attack my rook here, still keeping an eye on the g6 pawn and keeping his king away from it. And now he goes queen c1 check, and the king just runs away from the checks. Queen comes back to g5. So I don't get to win that pawn after all, but I can just exchange here and go into a rook and pawn ending, which is winning for me because I have these passed pawns, and black doesn't have any passed pawns. So this should be winning. It's always, rook and pawn endings are always a bit tricky. So I start advancing my passed pawn, and he brings his rook in to attack it. And I'm just going to advance all the way. I think it's going to be difficult for me to get my king over to help support this pawn. So my idea is to advance my pawn all the way and then switch my attention to the other side of the board once his king comes over. So he goes rook b5, getting behind the pawn. I go check. He comes forward with the king, and I go b7. And he comes forward one more step. So he's just close enough. There's this trick, which is pretty common in these rook and pawn endgames, where you give up the pawn in order to get this skewer and win the rook. And if he doesn't take the pawn, then you queen. So this is a very effective technique. But in this case, his king is just close enough. It has to be within one square of that rook so that it can defend it. If the king had been on this square, then I would have run the rook. So that's why there's kind of this no man's land. The king can't be on either of these two squares. It can be, well, let's see, let's show you the squares it can be on. It could be here or here, and that would keep my rook from coming over and doing this trick. Or it could be here or here and be close enough to defend the rook. So that leaves this gap in between where if you catch the king in one of those squares, you can play this trick and win the rook. Okay, so anyway, I just went into this knowing it would be a king and pawn endgame, and I would have the outside passed pawn. So I can use this to distract his king and hopefully bring my king over and round up his pawns. So that's my plan. The problem is that that these pawns are quite advanced, and when he plays the move f5 here, it actually cuts off my king. It controls all of these squares, and I can't get over to attack any of these pawns. So I have to really play this precisely. I start out okay, king g3, he plays f5, and then I realized, oh, my plan of just coming over here and winning the pawn is not going to be so easy. So right now there's only one or two moves that maintain a win. So this was a winning endgame, but I have to play f4 here, or f3. Let's try f4, see how this would go. So he would take, He'd also push. How about if he just pushes? Then I run over to h4. Okay, and I can get these pawns. And if he doesn't push, if he takes, then I take back with the king. And once again, I can attack these pawns, and his king can't leave this behind. Okay, so that's the idea with f4, is activating the king. If he ignores it and plays king b6, then I take here, and that opens up a square for my king, and I can get in this way. Okay, so that's how to win the game, and it's right in this position. I need to play f4, and f3 apparently works as well. But f3, king c6, f4. Yeah, f4 is the key idea. You're only playing f3 as a step towards f4, so only a computer would think that was a reasonable move. f4 is the move here. So I didn't play that. I played king f3, thinking I had to run over here and defend this pawn now. And now this is a draw. And let's go forward a few steps. It stays a draw. And this didn't help. It didn't hurt, but it didn't help. He can just ignore that pawn that I threw up there. And now we're just wasting time here. But as long as he keeps staying in these squares, I can't ever make progress. The problem is, if I were to ever push my pawn, for example, if I were to play b3 there, then he just comes here to a3, and now actually I'm losing suddenly because I can no longer defend the pawn. See, his pawn is controlling that square, his king is controlling that square. It's my turn to move. I have no good moves. If I push these pawns, they'll just get taken. So now I go back. He wins the pawn. He has the opposition here. He's going to win this. Let's see. Oh, it's my move here? Well, I wouldn't take. I would just stay here. New variation. But he can go king c3 and attack my pawn here. Go here. Yeah, so he can force me away from the pawn and win that one and then go on to win the game. So I can't play the move b3, which is what I realized here. So I have nothing to do but waste more time with the king. So if he were to just stay on these two squares here, or these three, just in this little triangle here, then there's nothing I can do. There's no way I can make progress, so the game would end in a draw. But what happened was he played king c5, and now after I come up this way to a2, and he played, I could still draw with f takes g4 or king b4, but he's decided to run this way, and now I'm winning once again. So that was a close call, because I'd been winning most of the game, but I threw it away with that one move in the endgame. Really have to play those precisely sometimes. But no, this is a pretty straightforward win, and just go through the rest of it. I can pretty much grab this pawn at any time. I just was waiting till the last moment to grab it, and then I'll queen this pawn. So he resigned, and that's how the game ended. So I thought that was pretty instructive. Hope you guys enjoyed that. Leave any comments you have in the section below, and I will see you again soon. Bye.